Welcome back to another edition of the Shinsei Fitness Show, where we talk about everything related to your health, your fitness, your well-being. What is balance? In this segment, I want to talk about one of the pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability from the perspective of the Shinsei method: balance. Those three pillars are inner strength, inner balance, but particularly self-trust. I developed the Shinsei method to be a method of self-training, primarily because I found that there's not a lot of practical advice on how to make choices, how to make decisions, and then really stand by your choices and decisions, particularly if there's some kind of personal stake involved. The things that people are experiencing today really highlight the importance of that inner independence, that inner strength, because in some cases there are very strong penalties that accrue to people who want to stand by a decision that they make that may not be popular. But unfortunately, that's really what it boils down to in many social settings. If you want to do what's right, if you want to do what is important and consistent and profitable to you, and when I say profitable, I mean something that's of benefit to you, benefit in terms of your health, your well-being, your mental state, your stability, your financial situation. No, I don't offer financial advice, and I'm not a financial advisor, but I do talk about certain principles that really I have learned through being a personal or a private investor. I use the concepts that come from investing and science to really provide insight into what we talk about on this show and at theshinsei-method.com. And I apply that idea and I apply that perspective, that mindset, to what I talk about on this show, the Shinsei Fitness channel, which you can also find at Shinsei Method YouTube channel. Because there's a lot that can be learned from applying principle from various areas of life to various areas of life in this practice of fitness. Because what I found is that in many social settings, fitness tends not to be promoted. Now, that might seem counterintuitive, particularly in a culture that really seems to be hysterical about sports, professional sports, various sports, in some cases, the Olympic sports. People seem to be very sports-oriented. There's a lot of influence in the culture in terms of the kind of gear you can get, shoes, clothing, outdoor recreational equipment. And these things are all very good. I really like finding new gear and testing new gear, new sneakers, new pants, new whatever, new clothing, new weights, new fitness equipment, new recreational equipment. These are all very important and they are really fun to do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But unfortunately, what tends to happen in many of these kind of situations is that people don't go behind the gear. They don't go behind the activity to understand what is required to build, let's say, strength, physical strength, mental strength. Very often you'll see people who are very physically strong, or they appear to be physically strong, but emotionally they're very weak, and you can look at their lifestyles or their attitudes and how they treat people to demonstrate that for yourself. When I talk about inner strength, I'm talking about strength on many different levels. It's not what people tend to understand, or they confuse strength or inner strength with being, is rudeness. That's not strength. That's actually weakness, inner weakness. What I'm talking about is an inner strength to stand by your convictions, and really the strength to build those convictions and develop those convictions over a period of time on your own, particularly when those convictions may not be very popular. Now, when you talk about that kind of inner strength in application to fitness, I talk about this on other segments of the show, and I talk about it all the time at the Shinsei Method YouTube channel and the Shinsei-method.com. Because I often talk about the social discouragement, or the discouragement you get in many social settings. And I have really, from a personal standpoint, experienced this in many situations, living situations. Most of the people that I've known personally didn't take fitness very seriously. But I have always promoted and strove toward really fitness, strength, physical strength. I started in powerlifting, lifting and competitive powerlifting, and continued that kind of strength training all of my life, and continue to this day within the limitations that I have based on age and really experience and time. But I still continue to pursue this very important value of strength. But unfortunately, not a lot of the people around me, in fact, I don't know anyone else around me who does that. I've gone to gyms. I've practiced in gyms. I've trained in gyms. I've read fitness training programs. I've read them in magazines, and you pick up any of the magazines, and most of the time you see people on the cover and they have washboard abs. These kinds of things are all so important. And there's nothing wrong with exercising to the extent that you look and feel good. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's one of the great things about physical culture or physical fitness, because physical fitness is one of the few areas where you can set a goal for yourself, pursue that goal physically. Let's say you want to gain a certain level of physical strength. Well, it's relatively easy to measure that, and it's not the same in other areas. And also, physical fitness depends only on you. It depends on how much you put into it. It's one of the most, or the closest to a mathematical function. When you put into a function, certain variables into a function, that function is going to be some kind of mathematical equation. A mathematical equation is a function. It's a mathematical function. And if you plug in certain constants or variables into that equation, you'll get an end result, usually. And sometimes that end result can have a variable as well. But the point is, the result that you have from the function has to do with the function, but it also has to do with the input. It's a very important concept. That's what I mean when I say I use the principles from mathematics and science and investing in various areas to provide insight into what I'm talking about. In this segment of the show, I'm talking about fitness, but really balance. And that's important because balance, you can find examples in nature. One of the things that I picked up when I was studying chemistry, now I didn't learn this while studying chemistry from the class. In other words, I didn't learn this from the professors. I learned this on my own despite the professors, because unfortunately in many college settings, they don't teach those kind of important and practical principles. But one of the most important lessons from chemistry is the fact that nature, by the way it's designed, strives always toward balance and equilibrium. Now, it's not always in balance and equilibrium, but that's what drives chemical reactions. The chemical reactions are actually also driven by imbalance. There's an imbalance in concentration, there's an imbalance in mass, there's an imbalance in charge. And so those imbalances then drive that chemical reaction to try to achieve a balance in all of those areas, in mass and concentration and in charge. That's the key point. That's the key takeaway, as people like to say. That through striving toward or having the chemical reactions interact, or having the chemicals and molecules and elements interact in such a way to establish balance and charge and mass and concentration. So the point is that balance is very important. But what is balance? What do we mean? What do I mean by balance, in training particularly? Well, what I mean by balance is, first of all, it starts with a mindset. Mindset is one of the most important aspects in developing a fitness training program, particularly from the perspective of the Shinsei method. And that's one of the things that I learned in going through to gyms. That just because people go to gyms doesn't mean that fitness is important. What you'll see a lot of times is not fitness in many gyms not being practiced. Many times what you'll see is this hysterical and really extreme approach toward fitness. In other words, push, 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 always push, 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 push. Well, that's not balance. You can push and strive toward achieving a personal best. Did this all the time in powerlifting. But with powerlifting, there's also a training program understood, and that's very effective, called cycle training. Well, what does cycle training mean? Cycle training means balance. That's what that means. It means that you train and you build up to a personal best, and then you cycle back to, or you drop back down to a light training regimen. And this is your cycle. You start with a light training regimen, and you gradually build up. Usually it's about a 12-week period. Sometimes you can take it to 8 weeks, depending on what the competition is or what your goal is. But you train through that, and you cycle through that over a period of weeks up to a personal best, and you're trying to reach that pinnacle of your personal best, and preferably a personal best that supersedes your previous personal best. That's one of the great things about powerlifting, because you can always achieve a new personal best, and that personal best may only be a pound. And see, that's what I mean by mindset. That recognition that it doesn't have to be another extra 100 or 200 or 500 pounds. It can just be one. If you achieve a personal best of 1 pound every time you train over a period of years, you're going to increase your ability quite substantially and really in a relatively short period of time. Now what tends to happen is that you start out by striving toward increasing your ability by 1 pound, and of course you end up doing more naturally because your body can handle that. But what I'm talking about is the mindset of starting out or knowing to start out in a relatively mild way and gradually building up to your personal best and then cycling back through light training. And it's that concept of balance, that concept of achieving balance that's so important. That's one of the most effective ways to build up strength in powerlifting. Now, I'm not a personal trainer. I'm not a physical therapist. I encourage you to seek out the advice of someone who is competent in this area of field, preferably a sports medicine doctor, but not always. Sometimes the physical therapists are quite knowledgeable about what can help you, but unfortunately the physical therapists tend to focus on injury. So obviously what I'm talking about is trying to get you into the mindset that helps you to prevent injury. So one of the things that is important is to talk with a reputable professional. Sometimes you may have to search it out for a little while because very often doctors that you speak with, particularly your standard general practitioner, doesn't know much about the physical and the musculoskeletal system. And what will help you, sometimes they do, if they're also training. The best doctors I have found have been doctors who also train on their own, and then they pick up knowledge and they're very effective. But sometimes you may have to seek that out a little bit before you can get to the point of finding someone that you feel comfortable with. But I encourage you to do that because even if you have to pay them for a consultation, it's well worth the money because it can save you a lot of time in terms of injury, in terms of frustration, etc. from the medical perspective. But what I'm talking about is more from a personal perspective and a mindset perspective, an intellectual perspective, because that's so crucial. It's your mindset that determines what you do. It's your mindset that determines your training, how you train, when you train, whether or not you train. Now, the thing that I have found that's very important is to have a mindset of balance because very often what happens is your body is not always up to the task of intense physical training. But if you go to many gyms or you work with many personal trainers, they'll push you to do it anyway. That's where injuries can happen. And then, of course, if injuries happen, nobody wants to take liability and responsibility. Now, this comes back to one of the most important aspects of the Shinsei method and why I developed Shinsei. Because if you take the approach that I'm advocating, it's a very unique approach. It's sensible. It's what you will see in many reputable places, sources, magazines, websites, etc. But what you'll find is that a lot of people are practicing it. So in order for you to practice this very sensible approach to fitness requires what I call those 3 pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability. Inner strength, self-trust, and inner balance. Of those, self-trust is the most important, but of course, for the purposes of this segment of the show, I'm talking about balance. Balance in your mindset. In other words, you're approaching fitness, and you're approaching anything you do, but in particular fitness, you're approaching fitness from the perspective that you're going to maintain a certain equilibrium, a certain balance, much like nature would do. Now, yes, you can go and you can hit it hard, if you want to hit it hard and pump it up. And this is the kind of thing you often hear in many gyms. That's nothing wrong with that. That can get you psyched up, that can get you motivated when you're up to it. And that's what I realized. And this mindset is important. Because I injured my shoulder and my back previously, and it severely limits my ability to train, and I regret that a bit. Not because I was always pushing myself, but because I had a mindset of strength training that I didn't really adjust over the years. And as you get older in particular, you have to adjust that. But if you have a certain mindset where you want to just train for your maximum potential, that's the attitude I had in the mindset, you end up, even though you're not trying to, you end up potentially injuring yourself. And by the time when you injure yourself physically, you never go back. So it's better to avoid that altogether and try to train in a balanced, sensible way. Not using that concept of cycling is important. Well, you start out easy and stay easy if you're not up to it. Very often, I don't feel so well. This morning, I wondered if I wanted to even take a walk. I did some heavy training yesterday for my level. I did self-defense training and walked a little bit as well. And so today I was a little bit stiff, and I don't like to be stiff like that. So I thought, well, a little light exercise would be good because it will help overcome the stiffness to a certain degree. But I can do that because I've been training for 40 years, 35 years. What I strongly suggest is that if you're not up to it, you can use your physical ability, or you're feeling under the weather, even if you're not feeling too well, to think about it intellectually, to plan your next routine intellectually, to write it out if you like. And you can still keep mentally active even though you're not physically active, and get yourself really the ability to rest. Now sometimes I have found, depending on your ability and your level and your age, even if you're not feeling so well, and you can tell, I'm not talking about you feeling sick, and if I was feeling really bad, or if I felt that something hurt, I wouldn't have done anything. I probably would have iced it, rested it, and that would have been that. But it wasn't that. It was just a little bit of stiffness. And I knew that by doing a little light exercise, so I walked about a half hour, I knew a little light exercise would help me mentally as well as physically, and it did. That's what I mean by balance. That's what I mean by mindset. Accepting that as an appropriate level of training, a satisfactory level of training, because your mindset says it's balance that's important. It's the long term that's important. But establishing that mindset is not really all that easy to do. That's why I developed the Shinsei method, to have those 3 fundamental steps. Analyze your key terms, define those terms in an individually suitable way, act on those terms, reevaluate and repeat. That becomes the process of Shinsei. That becomes the process of training. That becomes the process of self-training. That becomes the process of fitness training. Most importantly, that becomes the process of you. And it's so crucial to do that, but not so terribly easy to do that, because in many situations, social situations in this country, people tend to be very unserious about these things. And it's that level of unseriousness where people want to joke about things all the time that makes it very discouraging, and sometimes makes you feel like you want to give those kind of goals up. Again, that's why I developed the Shinsei method, because that's when you need self-trust the most. That's when you need inner strength the most. That's when you need inner balance the most. Because these are fundamental principles of life. They're fundamental principles of nature. As I said, nature is based upon balance and equilibrium. So if it's good enough for nature, it's probably good enough for you. And I like to use that really as a foundational understanding or foundational concept to provide a certain level of inspiration, because inspiration is so important too. A lot of times what you need though is self-inspiration, because in many social settings there's a lot of discouragement, particularly, and it may not be that direct. The discouragement you get may not be that direct. It may just be most of the people that you know don't work out. That's pretty discouraging in many ways, until you get to a level where self-training or physical fitness training and fitness is an important element of your life, and you don't feel so good unless you do it. To get to that level is really the key, and that's what's often called in self-defense and martial arts, or sometimes called Bushido. Do means way, Bushi with the samurai. And sometimes in Bushido, that is called Shugyo or Zanshin, also called Makoto. Getting to a point where you are training in fitness it's such an important element or aspect of your life that it doesn't matter what other people are doing. You don't feel so great unless you do something that is fitness oriented. That's the mindset to develop. And that really is one of the most important goals. To get to that goal, though, takes those 3 pillars of individuality, well-being, and profitability. Inner strength, inner balance, self-trust. But balance is key. Balance is key. And to me, and for the purposes of the Shinsei method, that's what is the meaning of balance. That's what balance means. Until the next time on the Shinsei Fitness Show, where we talk about everything related to your health, your fitness, your well-being.